So the distributed collaborative organizations, and Simon, you're not presenting, right? Well, you are? Okay.
Yeah. So I will do a presentation and then we do the panel.
So there's a formal presentation now and then the panel discussion. So over to Primavera.
Okay. So, okay. So I will present now a system for, so let's start with the beginning. With the blockchain, we have the ability now to deploy those smart contracts, which can eventually turn into, so there's the concept of distributed autonomous organization. Most of the time, the distributed autonomous organization is actually not necessarily autonomous. It is basically just a sophisticated set of smart contracts which are interacting with each other. And so we can create those decentralized applications, which is basically, instead of having an application running on a server, we have an application which is running on the blockchain. So there is no central place. It is just executed simultaneously on the blockchain by every node. So the interesting thing is then we now today we have a lot of digitally mediated organizations. So people that are organizing each other, interacting through digital media. And with the blockchain, we can now have blockchain-mediated organizations, which is yet another word for distributed autonomous corporation, distributed autonomous organization. Now it is called distributed collective collaborative organizations. So before the blockchain world, we have a few examples of collaborative organizations, which are basically most of the open source software communities, Wikipedia, and so on. Then somehow the model of the open source model has inspired economic players also to experiment with some kind of collaborative organizations, but those are mostly like crowdsourcing organizations, but they rely on one central authority, which is in charge of managing the flow of contribution and coordinating individual actions. So the question then is, now that we have the blockchain, is it possible to actually create decentralized organizations which do not rely on one central authority, that do not have a middleman, but that allows people to organize themselves through the blockchain in a decentralized manner? So what are the different ways in which people can coordinate themselves? We have the commonplace method of hierarchical structures, which is centralized coordination, and then we have ways for decentralized coordination. So the most common ones that we know is like market mechanism, social norms, and then with the internet we have this new concept of architecture. Architecture can be used as a form of decentralized coordination in the sense that it's actually guiding how people can interact or behave on an online structure. And it can be done in two ways. One is a more top-down approach, which is the regulation by code, which is when there is one architect or designer that deploy a particular technical structure, and this structure will dictate what people can or cannot do. And then a more interesting design is a more bottom-up approach, which is governance by design, which is basically about creating a platform on which people can then govern themselves. So it's using the technology not as something that is dictating the behavior, but is like as a medium that people use in order to design governance system on top of this. So I will present now. So the question then is, of course, we need to design this distributed governance system. So it's not enough to have a technology. There needs to be a way to coordinate actions, to coordinate people together. And because we didn't have such a technology before, there has never been a need for a decentralized governance structure. Now, if we do actually want to experiment and deploying decentralized organizations on the blockchain, then we need to come up with new experiments and new idea on how to do that. So this is, Backfeed is a project, a protocol that I'm working with. It's a collaborative effort. And this is a proposition. This is a work in progress. So actually, I would love to have any kind of feedback on this. But it is a way for governing and for incentivizing behavior on a decentralized network, which are promoting good behavior and which are distributing value to the people that are behaving in line with the value system of the organization. So it is based on 3 essential components. 1 is token distribution, 2 is a reputation system, and 3 is an economic model. So in order to explain how the model works, I will actually provide an example, which is, this is actually the first community that is experimenting with this protocol. Lazuz is a decentralized ride-sharing platform. So it's basically Uber on the blockchain. So I will just show a very short introduction. Is there volume?
The world's most transformative innovations made it easier for people to do amazing things together and meet our basic human needs. Food, water, safety, and belonging are all connected by the need for movement. Transportation is like the bloodstream of human development. Without it, everything would come to a halt. Yet along with the benefits, advances in transport have given us some serious side effects, like air pollution, global warming, urban sprawl, and habitat destruction. To address these problems, we need local innovation. Lazuz believes that pairing community wisdom with advanced technology can make it easier for people to come together and solve the challenges of transport. To test our vision, we're creating a community-owned real-time ride-sharing service powered by revolutionary blockchain technology. Ride-sharing is the perfect platform to put our mission into practice. Even after all the positive disruptions of the past few years, our transportation infrastructure still spends a huge amount of time, energy, and effort moving empty seats from place to place. Lazuz puts tushies to the cushies, pairing passengers with drivers already on the road and letting both reap major rewards. What kind of rewards? Cryptographic tokens with actual value and practical utility. The Zoo's economy, like the Lazuz organization, is decentralized. The community decides on how Zoo's tokens should be distributed, based on a fair share model in which everyone, drivers, passengers, programmers, designers, is compensated according to his or her contribution to Lazuz. We imagine a future with thousands of Zoo's front-end applications, each adapted to meet the unique needs of the community it serves. Lazuz knows that the greatest innovation of all is cooperation. Cooperation makes it easier to do amazing things together. And that's Lazuz, unleashing human creativity to change the world of transportation and inviting everyone along for the ride. Lazuz, moving people.
Right, that's just a short introduction, but the important thing here is to understand that so Lazuz as a decentralized transportation system is itself trying to design a model of decentralized organization. So it's not just about providing a service, but it's also about building the platform for this service to be provided. So they want to decentralize themselves at every level. So when assuming that the platform was already built, it's then there is the question of like the token for people asking for a ride and providing a ride, that there is an exchange of token. But then there is also the question of how do we actually promote people to contribute to this organization. And in this sense, there is, so the model that is being built, the idea is we don't want to have there is no roles, there is no employees in the Lazuz community. It's actually pretty much like an open source community. So just like anyone can commit code to an open repository, in this sense, it's not about only code, but people can commit any kind of contribution. And then the question is how to reward those contributions, how to understand what is the value provided by every single contributor in a way that we can then incentivize the contributions that are valuable and less so the ones that are less valuable. So the way it works is that we can identify two key actions. One is people that provide a contribution to the community, and then it's people that are evaluating others' contribution. And out of the mixture of those two actions, we then have two outcomes. One is the distribution of tokens, so those are actually transferable economic tokens, and then the redistribution of reputation or influence within the community. So as a very general overview, the way it works is that every contributor is submitting the contribution to the community, and then whoever is already a member of the community, where being a member of the community basically means that the person has acquired reputation / influence within that community because of a previous contribution, then those people will evaluate that contribution. Whenever there is some kind of consensus within the community that the contribution is worth a particular amount of tokens, then the contributor will earn this amount of tokens, but will also earn a little share of reputation that comes along. And now, because of this, the contributor becomes an actual member of the community. And this is for the distribution of value and reputation. And at the same time, the actual evaluation process is itself affecting the reputation of the people that are part of the community or the influence. So whenever I say reputation, it's not about personal reputation, it's about how much my contribution to the community is valuable. So that is, influence is a better word. So whoever is actually in line with the community value, whoever is evaluating the contribution of others in a way that is actually consistent with the overall ideas of the community, will increase its influence within that community, whereas the people that are actually evaluating contribution in a way that is far away from what the community thinks will actually decrease their influence. Now, in terms of token distribution, is basically just everyone is providing their own evaluation, and whenever the median is reached, then this means that the actual amount of token is distributed. This is an ongoing process, so people can change their mind, but also people can maybe vote at a later time, so there can be a contribution that initially does not seem to be really valuable, and eventually after a few weeks or months, then people realize that this is actually really valuable, and there will be a lot of people that actually provide or that evaluate it positively. And in terms of reputation system, the model is, so whoever is making an evaluation is actually putting his reputation at stake. So there is a cost for making an evaluation, and this stake is then being redistributed to whoever has already predicted to some extent or already evaluated the contribution to be around the same range. Whereas if I actually if I put my reputation at stake and I say that this is worth 50, but then everyone else is actually saying that this is worth something different, then I will actually lose my influence. So that's how that's the mechanism that is such as to create an alignment. So the people that are actually aligned with the community value will have a high influence within the community. The people that are misaligned, they will keep losing their influence over time. Now, the interesting thing with this, so this is like the technical guts of how it works. I'm not going into detail, but if you're interested, we can discuss it later. Now, the interesting thing is then, what do we do with those tokens? So why will people contribute in order to receive Lazoo's tokens? The reason this is just magic internet money at the moment, up to the point in which we actually provide a use value to those tokens. So the way it works is that in order to actually use a ride, in order to get a ride on Lazoo's, I need to pay. The only way to actually obtain a ride, and that's the important element, is that I actually obtain a Lazoo's token. So this means that the people that have been contributing a lot to the Lazoo's community by providing code, by providing communication, by however they decided to contribute, and the evaluation has been, the contribution has been evaluated positively, will have collected tokens. And those tokens can then be used in order to use the service for free. So whoever is a good contributor to the community can access the service freely. Now, the interesting thing is that, well, there is also some people that did not contribute to the community, but they still want to use the service. So what they can do is they need to purchase those tokens. And how they purchase this token is in two ways. One is that by purchasing the token to the people that have contributed and have accumulated more token than they actually needed, or they can directly purchase them from the actual funds, from the Lazuz fund. So what this means is that there is an actual, so this covers the whole life cycle of a decentralized organization, which means that at the beginning, when there is no service being offered yet. So at the beginning, the people that are contributing to the community are people that believe in the vision, that believe that this community has a potential. And what they gain when they gain those tokens is actually, there is no real value in those tokens yet, but it's more like a share or an equity in that organization. And so those are the people that are the risk taker and which are the strong believer in the future success of the organization. Then over time, there is the service is being built, and eventually there is a point in which the community is now providing a service. This is the point in which those tokens, which until now did not have any actual value, obtain a use value. And this is also when those tokens can now be exchanged on the market. Now, as the service grows and as the demand for that service grows, this also means that the value of those tokens on the market is increasing, which will therefore bring new people to contribute to the community, because not just because of the ideological values, but also because of the potential monetary gain that they can gain from this. And so this moves from the initial section in which it's like really hardcore risk taker to a second period in which it's the people that actually want to use the service or the people that actually can see a monetary gain in providing contribution. And then there is a point in which the community reach a maturity level in which we don't need that many contributors anymore. So at this point, there will be less need for people to contribute, and this means that less token will be issued. So the market value of the token, on the other hand, there will be more demand for people to actually use the service. So this means that the market value of the tokens, of the Lazuz tokens, will become really high. And at this point is when the Lazuz community starts opening, becomes itself some kind of like bank or fund in which people can start purchasing tokens directly to the Lazuz community. So the community creates an upper bound, which means that whenever the market price goes over that upper bound, it will be always more convenient for people to purchase the tokens directly to the community, which means that new token will be issued by the community itself, and therefore the market price will drop. And so in this way, by creating an upper bound, we can reduce the volatility of the tokens, but also, this also means that the funds is increasing, and now the community is accumulating actual money, which becomes the money by which the people can redeem those tokens. And so we then reach the third phases in which there is this partial peg mechanism, and over time the partial peg reduces because the upper bound the upper bound can be lowered over time, and these actually increase the lower bound, and so the market value is always within this level up to the point in which you might actually reach a total peg, and that's the point in which we have an actual standard economy in which people can purchase those tokens and sell those tokens, and people who contribute to the community, they know for a fact that they can always redeem it for this particular amount of money. So this is how we can move from a complete like economy-less decentralized organization, which then evolves into just a standard pegged one-to-one or whatever to one token-based economy. That's about it.
Questions?
I don't know if it's clear.
Questions?
Yeah, please.
Any questions? Let me go. Anyone want to go? Could you go the other way? And you're saying starting with a token and end up with the standard form economy. Could you go the other way? Start with a standard form economy and
I mean, ideally you can, but then you need funds.
You're trying to bootstrap this whole thing.
The idea is to bootstrap without any money.
Yeah,
it is possible to, but if it's impossible to start with the pegged mechanism without already having a way for paying the redeem.
Okay, so you can't start with a peg and go back. I mean, if you had money and threw money at this problem, as in this money or traditional money, then you might.
If you have a fund, you can start with a peg according to the fund.
Okay, money people, pay attention to that. Okay, so now we're going to move into the panels, all right? Okay, thank you. So can I, Constance, Simon? Yep. And we've got others joining, Joseph and Carl. Oh no, Sam, you gonna join? Why not? No? Okay.
So we actually did a call for papers across some of the topics that we were trying to discuss here at this conference. And we received a lot of submissions. They were really great ideas, but ones that needed further development. And so out of all the papers that were submitted, we selected Simon. So he's here to contribute to this panel. I'll just let you guys take a couple minutes to introduce yourselves, discuss what you're doing. Joe Lubin's at the end, founder of Consensys, and then we can start from there.
Hi, Joseph Lubin, one of the co-founders of Athyrium, founder of Consensys. Consensys is an organization that is decentralized. Got a lot of people around the world. A bunch of us are in New York City. And we're building tools for the Ethereum ecosystem. So that's 3 of the implementations, Blockchain Explorer, web-based IDE for developers. We're building decentralized applications, and we're doing some consulting work as well.
Primavera de Filippi, I guess you know me, but my research at the CNRS, faculty associate at the Berkman Center, and I guess relevant for this panel, I'm working on the Backfeed project for designing distributed value system for decentralized organizations.
Yeah, I'm Simon. I worked on the besides working on the IP stuff that I said earlier, my primary interest has always been looking at the internet and figuring out how it changes in the way we organize and how we can organize in different ways into the future. The paper that I wrote was partly inspired by the research that I did for my master's degree. I did a degree in sociology, and I researched in the way the current online tools mediate our ability to process information. So, you know, if you're an IRC channel or you're in a forum or you are in Instagram or Snapchat, how does the tool itself determine what and how we can communicate in that environment? And, you know, there are certain limitations. Some of them create a critical mass earlier besides others. Like, so IRC channel can have a maximum of 200 people discussing at the same time, and then at that point it becomes chaos. It's unreadable, it's unmanageable. No one can, any new participants, when they arrive, just leave because it's you can't process the information fast enough. It's not novel anymore. So that's an example of stuff I researched. So looking at that, I try to look in ways in which we could potentially, how could blockchains potentially help us organize in new ways? Because, you know, the internet came along and suddenly we have this possibility to organize in completely different ways. And one example is you are sometimes more closer to people that are in different places in the world than rather than the local communities you're involved in. Like, I feel closer to a person in my World of Warcraft guild, or, you know, I am very close to my fans on SoundCloud. You know, that kind of community is now capable, but is there a way to create more tools to uplift these communities and make them more, I wouldn't say sovereign is the right word, but empower these communities to basically care for each other in cross-jurisdictional manners. So the paper was around using blockchains in a way to mediate conversation. So if we assume that certain tools reach critical mass in terms of conversation, at some point it just becomes incredibly difficult to use or talk there, then you could essentially design some kind of algorithms or check if it's recorded on the blockchain, to check at what point it becomes it reaches critical mass. And because you're using a system that has a native token, a value token in it, you automatically have spam control. So the original idea, or one of the core components of Bitcoin and blockchain was Adam Back's Hashcash, which was the idea that you needed to prove something or show something in order to initiate conversation. And it's carrying that ideas around so that we can potentially say, hey, wouldn't it be great if we can have like a conversation tool where conversation is always novel? And that was sort of the ideas I proposed.
Fantastic. So I'm just going to slow it down a little bit for this audience, for those who might be new to the concept of DCOs and distributed coordination. So, you know, we've heard a lot over the last couple of days about the promise of this technology to lower transaction costs, to remove intermediaries, to allow large-scale coordination for people to govern themselves. And, you know, that was a lot of what we had heard and hoped for in the early internet days. And we've seen things with the emergence of Uber and Airbnb, and this idea of the sharing economy, which has actually, in the end, ended up serving very few while harnessing the power of many. In particular, the thing that always grabs me is, you know, Uber. I know people who drive Uber cars. They've sold their businesses to buy cars, or maybe they've left the taxi industry to join this organization. And Uber has 300 Google self-driving cars on pre-order. So a lot of these guys will be out of business as they pivot. So just to kind of get a level set, what is really new about the things that you guys are building and the promise of blockchain technologies that will enable actual decentralized coordination?
At Consensys, we're building a bunch of different decentralized applications at the application layer, obviously. And they fall into essentially two categories. There's the straightforward component where we're just a company and we're offering a service to people. But we have 5 projects that are open industry platforms, and those will all have a native token. The token will be intrinsic to the operation of the platform. We will stand up the infrastructure for the platform, we'll define a set of initial roles for the platform, and then people and businesses can fill those roles and ideally make a living. So one example is a poker platform, another is a prediction markets platform. On the prediction markets platform, we will sell a token, and we will define roughly 12 initial roles, and other people can come along and define new roles. On the prediction markets platform, a role will be proposition creator, proposition decider, data feeder, oracle, perhaps entities that provide leverage, perhaps consortium coordinators. So it's really all about turning the business to consumer model of commerce, I guess opening it up to be more of a peer-to-peer commerce layer where essentially people, to use Don Tapscott's term, people and companies are prosumers, they're producers and consumers. It's a different paradigm, I think, a more open paradigm for business.
And so I think I completely agree. I will add also that there is like one fundamental difference, which is that in the current Uber, Airbnb, whatever model, there is actually a misalignment of interest between the people that are managing the platform, which basically wants to maximize their profits, and then the people that are using the platform, which just want to use the service, right? So when you design a decentralized organization, because you're actually eliminating the operator, you're eliminating the middleman, which has the profit-oriented interest, then every person that actually contribute to or that use the organization is actually a co-owner, is actually a shareholder in that organization. And so you actually create a complete alignment of interest in which the users are the shareholder, and they all share the same interest, which is getting the best service without having without having to extract profit from each other, because they all just want to share the organization together.
Interesting thing to that is, and I think we've all started seeing it, people doing it, like sometimes when you you've used an Airbnb apartment and you go back to the same city, some people just, instead of going through Airbnb again, you just call the person and say, can I stay there? Or Uber saying, can I just get the number? And instead of using Uber again, I can pay you a bit more and use the same fare. In a more collaborative model, you would be incentivized to actually go again through the platform, because it creates value not just for Uber, but for more people.
But so I think one important thing is that the reason why until now we have those middlemen is twofold. One is because we actually need to coordinate a disparate number of people that do not know each other, and they need this kind of like central point of reference in order to meet each other and to match their needs, which is something that can be resolved with the blockchain, because we have this central point of reference, even though it's on a decentralized technology. So that's an important thing that the blockchain provides. The other thing, though, that requires a centralized authority is actually Airbnb is not just coordinating people, but is also providing this kind of system of ensuring that everything goes right, ensuring that people are behaving properly, creating these reputation reviews, etc. So it's actually creating trust, right? So you have this trusted entity that people can refer to, and they know that there is someone policing the network. And this the blockchain does not provide by itself. This is not enough just to have a decentralized database in order to resolve this problem. And this is why we need to actually design distributed governance models, which will enable people as a decentralized community to operate and to police or to govern the network in a way that does not require necessarily a central authority. And so this is what the backfeed model is. I mean, there will be many other emerging, obviously. But I think now this is the new challenge. It's like we have the technological platform. We know how to design decentralized organization, but we still are on the exploratory phases in terms of the distributed governance model that will enable those distributed organizations to operate in a way that people can trust that this is actually everything is all right on the network.
In a blockchain model, the way the current players can actually help in a way is, well, whether they'll be incentivized to help or not, it's not a question, but what they can provide in this arena is to be the reputation and trust providers. So, Airbnb could, open up a blockchain model and say to other providers to also be trust and reputation providers. So, and Airbnb will then have the advantage for being around for a while. And that's a useful thing when you consider that if you have this idea that there's trust and reputation providers, centralized trust and reputation providers providing their, that's their service essentially, is providing trust and reputation, that you could eventually then have the option where I could use my Uber rating to secure an Airbnb apartment. That would be great.
So intermediation is potentially an unstable thing, an unstable role. Ethereum, these decentralizing technologies are effectively tools for universal disintermediation. And entities like Airbnb and Uber are effectively going halfway towards disintermediation. In our economy, intermediaries represent, hopefully, a reduction of friction. Hopefully they make transactions more efficient, but as they get more powerful, they tend to try to increase frictions and extract more value from transactions than they add to value. So in these decentralized platforms, we have a mechanism for essentially price discovery for the appropriate price or cost of intermediation. Intermediation is a great thing. Let's just pay the right price for it.
Right. Actually, I'd love to hear from you, Joe, about the new emerging governance models that are actually being developed in practice on Consensys. I think one of the reasons why people are so excited about Consensys is that it's identifying actual use cases and building them out. Hopefully, making tangible the promise of blockchain and the Ethereum platform. How are you seeing these kind of emerging governance models within Consensys? I know it's a rather large team at this point.
It is a large team. So at the platform level, just one form of, it's almost like some of these platforms are self-governing. So another platform that we're building is essentially a resource-driven platform. It's an open energy market platform. And effectively, in the energy industry, the physical infrastructure for electricity delivery is becoming decentralized. And there isn't really a business logic infrastructure above that exists yet. And so the Athyrium technology and some of the tools that we're building is kind of perfect for that. And essentially, in those kinds of niches, a generator of electricity is creating a resource or has the potential to create a resource in the future, and you can create a token and issue that token, a kilowatt-hour token, and you can either have people trade that token on a spot market for either stored resource or immediately generated resource, stored in batteries, obviously, or you can issue futures or options against your future capability to deliver that. These kinds of infrastructures may require governance. I think it'll be governance of all the people that own the tokens. They're all stakeholders in the system. But it'll be interesting to see how governance emerges.
So much of this is about technological governance, and I'm reminded again and again that these are tools that are designed and wielded by human beings at the end of the day. So one thing that I've seen is in this space is that there are a lot of communities around the world that are outside of these formal coordination trust systems that actually work really well. They're incredibly resilient communities that pass money, that share goods, but these are communities that can't scale beyond the village, beyond the little local community. And the promise of blockchain is that one day they might. And then what you've seen though is as communities grow larger and you don't have that face-to-face contact, a lot of the kind of the values, community values that are embedded in these local systems can't be replicated. So what I'm wondering is with reputation systems in particular, how are we to avoid kind of the peril of kind of herd mentality? How are we to actually establish real trust? I mean, for example, could there be a Sybil attack on reputation? Could you create fake reputations? Could you get rid of a reputation that was not earned, for example? How, in kind of matching trust and face-to-face, knowledge of each other, how can we match that in the kinds of reputation systems that we're building?
Oh, I can take that. So in the real world, it's hard to conduct a Sybil attack because our reputations are multifaceted. So we're building a wallet. The wallet holds tokens of value and other things, but it also serves as a container for anchors for identity and persona. An individual could have multiple personas that they represent themselves from and interact in the world from. You can have a canonical persona that represents your state-registered identity. And you can have business persona, a gamer persona, perhaps a dark persona that you don't want linkable to any of your other personas. And persona is also a container for reputation. So we built a reputation system that enables counterparties to attest to the conduct of other counterparties in transactions like purchase and sale and lending, borrowing, repayment, gaming, collaboration amongst a group of people towards a specific goal, like creating a piece of software. And our thesis is that if you have multifaceted aspects of reputation, and it's richly connected, so there aren't little islands where there's this whole group of personas that are all positively feeding back on one another, but you have a persona that's richly connected to multiple personas in various different dimensions, that will be very difficult to spoof.
I think also as well, being in the blockchain space, I think a lot of us is very idealistic and like try to think of very grand about how we can really change the world. And I think being like trying to be more pragmatic about it, these kind of systems just needs to be a bit better than the previous ones. It doesn't need to be like overhaul the whole system and like suddenly we have whole new reputation systems. It just needs to be better. So just like a basic idea with the fact that why can't you like borrow reputation from other services? It's not. It's like, I mean, there are reputation aggregators like, you know, cloud or something like that. But you know, that's something that makes sense to us. Just the fact that, you know, wouldn't it be great if you can do that? But online servers don't really provide that interlinking yet. So just by the fact that we're just thinking like, what's the next step and that next iterative improvement.
And also I think that it depends on which community we're talking about. I think there are some communities that will require some level of identity. And then we can have like decentralized identity management system which have different layers, and you can connect your persona and disclose only a part of your persona according to who you're interacting with. And this is challenging actually, but this is the same thing, we're exploring how to do this. There are quite some initiatives that are doing that. There's an interesting initiative that is Treaty, which is reputation management, and which are also now going towards like certification, so insurance. So you collect, it's kind of like the one name system. You collect multiple identities into one, you collect multiple reputation, and you aggregate everything, and then you can act as you ensure that this person is trustworthy, because the more aggregated information you have, the more trustworthy you can be. But I think that there is also other communities that, in fact, you don't need an identity as such, as much as you need a way to interact with that community. And I think for instance, in an open source community, or even in things like Lazus, it's not really about who I am as much as about what did I do in the past, or like what is my contribution to this community. And in this sense, it's actually, to some extent, I don't know what is easier or not, but you can actually design system in which it just doesn't matter. So it's not about like trying to identify how I can know that this person is this person. It's actually whether I am one person, whether I am splitting my identity into 100 different personas, or actually whether I'm aggregating myself into a group, I will have exactly the same effect when I'm interacting with the system. And in that sense, you're actually bypassing the problem of identity management by just relying on reputation/influence, which can be easier for certain communities. Probably doesn't apply in the case of, for instance, a bank and things like this, in which you actually need an identity. But for many communities that do not require an identity management, I think it can be actually much easier.
And perhaps you could interact with a system that requires a persistent
and you can
identity
connect.
for KYC.
So you can also start thinking about reputation in a more economic context. There's a system called Trust Davis that we're just starting to look into implementing, and it's essentially a vouching system. So I can vouch for Simon in a financial transaction. I know he's good to repay that loan, or I believe he's good to repay that loan, and the lender can just trust me to vouch for him, or I can put some money behind Simon and say I will guarantee all of that loan or a portion of that loan. I may do that just because I'm a nice guy and Simon's my friend, or I may do that as a piece of business. I may take a small cut from that. So the blurring of reputation and business is interesting. Another really interesting aspect of reputation in this context is that essentially digital ID and reputation becomes portable. So I can go into a bank office and probably put some aspects of my reputation on the table and get a loan, but most people around the world can't do that. But if they do develop an online persistent portable reputation, they can access capital pools from all around the world and maybe get a small loan and build that reputation.
So one of the most exciting, I think, potential of these technologies is the ability to tokenize or represent different forms of value. So, we started with the first blockchain was Bitcoin, and this idea, and you had to get really philosophical about what money is. What really is it? A medium of exchange, store of value. But at the end of the day, it's some representation of your blood, sweat, and tears, either your usefulness, your labor, something. What I'm wondering is, just like access to networks, in the real world, that would be your social network, your family network, your financial history, that people are able to build that up over time the stronger the network is. If we tokenize something like reputation, do you think you would see the same kinds of kind of concentrations of people who had access to those networks? Or do you think it would allow, for example, if you could have a portable identity which you could capitalize on online, would that equalize the ability to build capital, whatever form of capital that took? And then my next question, which maybe you guys can answer together, is, so this is an exciting potential to be able to really have a token that represents a community value, something that you really value, your ethics, to be able to demonstrate and count things like helping others, things like creating art, things that are actually creating real value in the world that aren't counted right now by traditional economic measures. But then there's also the danger of making every interaction an economic interaction. So I think that goes to the last point. Will we help each other because we think we will only be rewarded? Will that change kind of the social psychology of how we give? So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
The idea of using tokens to create more capital and share wealth, it's a really exciting idea. Just because of the fact that when we look at the current ways in which we create wealth, it often excludes a large portion of the population. If you have someone that is poor and they really believe in this company and they want to partake and buy some shares, even just getting access to or know how to buy a share in a public market, that education is there, that person doesn't have the money. It's difficult for them to start small businesses, for example, but even on a more granular level, it's like, what if this guy in this community is a rapper, right? And he feels he's gonna make it big. It's like there is this sort of value that circulates in these networks, but it's not being unlocked in any way. And just the idea that potentially we could create more opportunities for wealth sharing, that's exciting. And onto the next point, which is, does this create an issue in terms of valuing interactions? It is potentially an issue because of the fact there's been a lot of scientists and a lot of studies in this regard. One of the famous examples is by a scientist called Dan Ariely. He wrote a book called Predictably Irrational. And he gave an example of if you want someone to help you move your furniture, if you tell them, hey man, next weekend I just need some help, I'll get you some beers afterwards, people are more than willing to help you because the interaction is not an economic interaction, it's a social interaction. But if you tell them, hey man, I have $10 to give you, they're gonna go what? Is that what I'm worth? Is this what this thing is doing? So it is a difficult thing to say, yes, we want to create more wealth sharing opportunities, but it's a problem if that starts changing our interactions with people. So ideally, we would want a combination of both, which is unlocking networks of value, but putting it and letting it disappear behind interactions, so that it still feels like a social interaction, but we're still helping each other and hopefully unlocking more value.
On that point, I will also suggest everyone. So as I was working on Backfield, I think over 50 people told me that I need to read Down, In and Out in the Magic Kingdom of Cory Doctorow, which I did read, by the way. And it's actually a really good book. It's really short. And it's actually about how society will become. So it's in an abundant society in which people don't have problem with scarcity, and that there is no more money, but there is reputation. And so every interaction becomes monetized. I mean, the money becomes the reputation. And it's kind of like this dystopian vision of society in which everyone is like really afraid of interacting with anyone else because they know they're gonna be judged all the time, etc. Which is probably not a society in which we want to live in. However, I think that, and I think this is an important thing to keep in mind when we actually move into all those reputation systems. I mean, like, reputation is the new currency, perhaps, but I think there is like two things. One thing is like reputation should actually not be transferable because otherwise the reputation is currency. And the other thing is that, and this is something really important like for the backfeed model, but I think in general, reputation to the person is different from reputation according to the contribution. So if what you're evaluating is the human relationship, because when I interact with someone, I'm getting evaluated all the time, that's not really great. On the other hand, evaluating a particular contribution of a person does not really say anything about the person as much as how much that particular contribution is valuable in the eyes of a particular subjective value system, which is a community value system. And in this sense, you can actually, like, in this sense, I don't think it really distorts too much. I don't think it gets into such a dystopian society. On the contrary, actually, because I can make contributions and I can actually see where my contribution is the most appreciated, and therefore I can understand which community are aligned and which community I should actually be contributing to, because those are the ones that actually appreciate my contribution. So I think reputation is a kind of this tricky word because it means many different things and it can be applied to many different things. But I think when we actually, like in the context of decentralized organization, identity management is one particular kind of reputation, whereas like value distribution and contribution-based reputation is really different, and I think it's less dangerous.
Okay, so one approach or philosophy would be that all interactions are economic interactions, and so we can have monetary interactions, we can have emotional interactions, social interactions, psychological interactions, and one could argue that we're always putting a price on them or putting value to them, and so if we do explicitly represent those things with tokens on a blockchain, and I don't have systems for all of those things, of course, then it'll be interesting to see how all of those values are determined in perhaps open markets. It'll be interesting to see whether we deceive ourselves less about our own value.
Yes, it's a brave new world. So just on that point of that you can select your community too, that reflects your values. In these models, do you see this as a two-way street? That, you know, yes, your reputation will be public, perhaps not fungible, but carries some sort of economic value. But will we then also see kind of the content of the communities that coalesce? Is it a two-way mirror?
So in our model, or persona is essentially the container for reputation. There are two kinds of reputation. There's reputational attributes, and those are things that you own, state registered ID, Twitter, email, etc., medical records, financial records. These are things that you want to be potentially private and granularly under your control, and those things you let your eye doctor see some things, and your banker see other things. And attestations, reputational attestations that I was talking about before, those things are not really under your control. So those are out in the community. And
like a Yelp rating.
Yeah, pretty much. So I can perhaps say that I disagree with this attestation, but I can't erase it.
And in your backfeed model, would there also be the ability to? You said that you know, you can then turn to communities that reflect, you know, certain kinds of values. The more these reputation systems become more robust, how do you see that kind of flow of information and reputation building between communities and individuals?
Well, so actually, one of the main justification why I started working on the Backfeed project was actually that the recognition that oftentimes you contribute to different communities, and it's actually there is kind of like a high cost of switching from one community to the other because there is no interoperability. In fact, so by analogy with the internet, I will say that we're now, like the way I see the Backfeed protocol is actually like some kind of, just like the HTTP protocol. So in the sense that we are, like with the blockchain, we're now developing a lot of applications, decentralized applications, which do not have any way of interoperability between each other. In the same way as like before the web, before the HTTP, people were just building applications on top of the TCP IP, but those applications were just like starting from scratch and did not have a common protocol to communicate with each other. So in some ways, it's not a perfect analogy, but the idea is that by deploying this protocol layer on top of the blockchain, then you can use this protocol to create a particular decentralized application. You can use the same protocol for another decentralized application. And because they have a common basis, they have a common understanding of like token and reputation, then they can interact with each other. So as I acquire influence within one organization and I have influence in another organization, if that organization itself can be regarded as like kind of a concentric model, within a larger ecosystem, this organization itself has influence within the ecosystem as well as the other one. And so by transitivity, I can understand what is the value of my reputation in one organization and in the other, and more globally within the ecosystem. So by using similar protocols, then we can then create much more interoperability between different value systems, which we don't need to understand, or we don't need to explicitize what are the different value systems of those organizations. But because they all belong to the same ecosystem, we can understand what is the interaction between them. And so me contributing to one organization, I accumulate both tokens from that organization and reputation from that organization. And so this allows me two things. One thing is that I can understand, so let's say I contribute to Wikipedia, and then Wikipedia itself has some kind of reputation within the broader Creative Commons community, right? So me contributing to Wikipedia means that my reputation can also be understood within the Creative Commons community because there is this common protocol. The other thing that is also interesting is at the token level. So because now communities can create their own token, which is the whole innovation in some way of the blockchain. Those tokens have a use value within the community, right? Those tokens do not necessarily have any economic value like on the fiat market. But if I have tokens for one community and then another community has its own token, like every community actually has their own value system and token system, then as long as the people from this community also have a desire to use the service from another community, then they will be willing to transact those tokens. And so you can actually create and the more there are, the more communities are using this same protocol with similar mechanism for distributing tokens, then you can actually get a much more rich network, like a mesh of possible exchanges, to an extent in which we actually get to the model in which every community creates its own token, and according to what is the systemic value of every community within the overall ecosystem, that is the value of that token. And I can just exchange it with whoever wants the service from that community.
It's very exciting to think of communities as markets to actually kind of promote connection versus competition. Although I don't want to know what the exchange rate would be between all of these communities. So before I open it up to the audience, just one last question. I actually really hate being asked this question on panel, so I apologize in advance. But I would love to be a part of a decentralized social network. I'd love to be able to connect without sacrificing everything that I'm creating to a corporation. I would love for the things that I do that don't bring me currency to be something that I can survive and live in prosperity on. How far are we? How far are we from actually having some working systems where some of these things might exist? 1 year, 5 years, 20 years?
Well, a decentralized social network, I mean, internally we had one of the developers at a hackathon made a Twitter equivalent on Ethereum. I mean, it's possible. So I mean, it can exist. I think the better question is, why should it exist? And in this example, people have started complaining about Twitter based on the fact that politicians were removing things they said in the past, right?
Have you read Twitter's terms and services, terms of condition? It's not nice.
Yeah.
They own a lot of stuff.
So in that example, you could say to politicians, well, you better use the blockchain version because we want to hold you accountable. So like things you said should remain open and in public. But in general, a blockchain-based social network will need to be much different than whatever exists today. The incremental innovation would probably not be sufficient for people to jump ship, right? Because like we are people that are currently more on the fringe. Like we appreciate privacy or like control and et cetera, right? So, but the core functionality of a social network is still the fact that it's about connections. And Facebook and Instagram and all these things have incredible network effects. And for 95% of people, that's fine. Until more people start caring about the things we care about, or we invent something completely new which induces new exciting connections, like community companies, cross-jurisdictional community companies will mean people would want to engage in that field and area. They want to communicate there because it builds up reputation or it makes them tokens. So that's my view.
I think there is like many ways in which it can be implemented, and there is 2 reasons why you would want to. So one, I will say there is like Twister, which is actually like really old, and I don't think anyone has ever used it. I tried to install it, but it was really difficult, so I gave up. But the concept of Twister was, let's use like the blockchain and let's have like no middleman, no censorship, etc., which is great, but it's not enough. And essentially, people don't care. Like diaspora has shown it. Like decentralization and freedom of expression is not enough to justify people to actually move into a decentralized system. On the other hand, I think, and the blockchain actually provides more than that. And I think what the blockchain, like the power of the blockchain is that it actually enables things that are not easily implementable without, which, so I mean, there is an actual amazing social network, which is Scenario, which is beautiful, a really beautiful protocol. And what it does, it actually uses the blockchain for what the blockchain is good at, which is controversially the monetization of social communication. So the way it works in like the protocol is really beautiful, but in a very summarized way, is that basically you pay in order to express yourself. If people actually appreciate what you're tweeting, they're gonna then you don't pay, because this means that people actually enjoyed receiving your communication, and then the more you're retweeted, the more actually you earn money. On the other hand, if actually so you can choose about how much far away your voice can go. You pay according to broadcasting the further. If people actually do not retweet you, it means that you're actually spamming them, that you are providing information that is not valuable to the network, and therefore you just pay. So you're actually using the monetization, which is what the blockchain is good at, right? So I'm not saying that scenario model is like amazing in the sense of like the way in which it monetizes, but it understands that what the blockchain provides beyond the decentralization, beyond the ability and the censorship resistance, is the ability of designing like monetary or like economic games, which can improve the system. So the problem with Twitter today is that I just see a lot of stuff that mostly, oftentimes, I don't really care about. If you can actually design a system, whether it's with reputation, with influence, or with economic transactions, which will enable me that when I connect to Twitter, I actually see what I want to see, because I see things from people from my community, or because I see things that people from my network have decided to retweet because they thought it was valuable, then it becomes much more interesting. And so I think so scenario exists. I think there will be many others that arrive, but there is a very important reason to use the blockchain for those things. Then the question is whether it's nice or not to monetize social communications, but that's a different issue.
So we're working on 2 projects that might be interesting answers to your question. First one is a decentralized Reddit system. And so that basically looks at the foundation, very similar to a Reddit system, but we have the notion of gilding a post. And essentially, if you or other people on the system want to send some ether to that post can become gilded essentially and memorialized forever. It can be one post or a whole thread or a set of posts. And you might want to do that if it's something particularly brilliant or if it's something that you don't want to be censored by a centralized version. So the main foundational part will either be based on Ethereum's Whisper or it will be centralized. Probably initially it'll be centralized, but eventually decentralized. The other project is something called Uport. And we're starting to think that the wallet is the new browser. So you're going to be interacting in this decentralized space from your identity and persona, which are anchored in keys in your wallet. If you think of, say, publishing systems all the way to advertising systems, you can interact with those systems from one of your personas. And you can subscribe to a publishing system and pay some money to receive some content that you're interested in reading or interacting with. You can receive some money for seeing an ad or interacting with an ad or doing a little piece of work. And right in the middle, if you're not interested in paying for this content and you don't need to be paid for this content, like maybe it's pictures of my friends at a nightclub the night before, so that's basically a news feed. And I can subscribe to that news feed, and that news feed can be coded to me privately or coded to a group so that only the group sees it or just public. And that's a decentralized, configurably private Facebook.
Pretty awesome stuff. Okay, we're going to open it up to questions. Robin?
So if you're familiar with the tale of stone soup, a lot of this sounds like the stone in the stone soup. That is, blockchain doesn't seem to be very central to most of these stories. There's a wide space of institutions that could be designed and explored, and most of these things you're talking about seem interesting and exciting if risky and unlikely, but blockchain doesn't seem to be very needed. So could you elaborate, just emphasize where it is that blockchain ends up making a difference here?
So blockchain makes a difference in that it is a community network where we all recognize each other's public keys and we store our own private keys, and a lot of the stored data can be shared on the blockchain, and a lot of the computation, at least on the Ethereum system, can be shared, and we can all agree on exactly what happened and when it happened.
I think for me, I'm thinking about it now, but there's some usefulness. The one is that any interaction, if you're working with a public blockchain, you require a native token, right, which has value. So it adds new emergent features to interactions that wasn't possible before. Like, not if you click like on Facebook, you're not putting in a credit card each time, right? So that provides potential new emergent factors. The second one is that it's a more interoperable ecosystem. between different applications, and it's more easily portable between different parts of it. Assuming you're, say, using Ethereum for all these applications, if you now want to, tell Airbnb, I want to use your reputation system for my sharing economy application, that's probably not going to happen. They'll have to build an API probably, and then they'll have to test it for a few months, and they might not ever do it. So that the fact that it's sort of a more open access layer helps in that regard.
Also, non-repudiability is an important property. Any centralized system can be manipulated by the people in control of it.
And also, I mean, the main thing I think I will say is that there is no middleman. And this has two implications. One is that I don't need to trust one central authority to behave well. So currently I have to trust Twitter, I have to trust Facebook that they will actually act. Of course, you can implement the same model on a centralized model, but then I need to trust that the central operator will actually behave accordingly. But the other one, which maybe is just as interesting, is to the extent that there is this tokenization. So when we actually create, for like the example of Lazuz, for instance, because we are tokenizing those interactions, and because we're eliminating the middleman, it means that everyone that is contributing to the community and that holds those tokens, then they have an incentive for this service to be the best possible service, because this will actually increase the value of the tokens. So because everyone is a shareholder in the organization, we all want this organization to be the best organization ever. So we all have the exact same aligned interest within the organization.
Yeah, I mentioned it before, but censorship-resistant systems, I think, are extremely valuable, and I don't know how to do that in centralized systems.
Okay, Rick?
Yeah, a question regarding the products you've been talking about. You've been using terms like shares, markets. A lot of the terminology sounds like the type of things that would be regulated. Have the folks at Ethereum, have you guys been looking at whether any of the new systems or ideas that you're coming up with are going to be subject to regulation in the United States or in Hong Kong or other places?
So some of you may not know that Ethereum was funded through a sale of software. That software was classified as such, as a software product in Switzerland, where Ethereum is located, or where the foundation is located. And we worked with Swiss lawyers, we worked with US lawyers, and it became clear that there was an interpretation that the token that we sold, the Ether token, similar to the Bitcoin token, was intrinsically necessary for the proper operation of this global computing appliance. And so we believed very strongly that we were not selling a security. According to our lawyers, we don't pass the Howey tester. We are clean in that regard. We at Consensys, as we stand up these platforms, we will do similar work with lawyers and make sure that we're not outside the bounds of securities law, both in the US and in other places. It looks like a lot of these systems will be structured similarly.
And there are a lot more difficult ways to create tokens without requiring a centralized issuer. Bitcoin is an example, using proof of work. There are some tools that have been developed on Ethereum where you could create tokens, but it's a process of verification that then the contract itself issues the tokens. So it's not people somewhere in the chain that issues the tokens, but it's a completely gray area at the moment. The fact that the code is issuing the tokens, I mean, are we going to hold DAOs legally liable for things? I don't know.
So last two questions before we take our coffee break.
I think one of the things that sounds a bit depressing is that we're all talking about technology to essentially enhance processes that currently exist. And I think the process themselves are broken because when you talk about reputation tokens, the first thing that comes to mind is college diplomas. And people will spend, I mean, it's crazy. You go on the minibuses and you have parents killing each other trying to get their kids in the right elementary school so they can get the right reputation token to get the next reputation token. And the other thing is that when you talked about sort of value tokens in order to participate in the community, that's not, the first thing that came to my mind is the US presidential elections, because you have to have an extremely large amount of money. So one thing that concerned me was that we're all talking about technology, but we're not talking about the society that we should form. And in particular with the blockchain, the one key aspect of the blockchain is the blockchain never forgets. But for example, if you're in a corporate negotiation, right, the first thing that you try to say is that this conversation is without prejudice, therefore we're at liberty to forget exactly or misremember exactly what happened in this conversation. If you talk to a politician, or if you, I mean, the hard part in talking to a politician or a bureaucrat is to convince them that they can talk to you about what they really think, and you're not going to go up to the Apple Daily and report that. So I'm wondering how the blockchain is going to help, or is it going to make things worse?
I mean, it's something like all these kind of questions. I mean, we're at the stage where we're still very much experimenting and bowling and thinking about these new ideas and different ways in which we can organize. That will still be possible, you know, off-record conversations, you know. So in some circumstances, having a value token to something might mean that it adds new benefits that wasn't possible before, and then you opt in to use that. And other ways you say, well, I don't agree with the fact that this elementary school reputation token diploma is what should be valuable in society, so I'm going to try and opt out of that, so I'm going to move to something else.
And you know, we would hope that we don't kind of replicate the same old game with these new tools, that access to capital, the problem of access to capital doesn't turn into the problem of access to reputation. But the hope is that with these open access systems that can interoperate, that large swaths of people who have been really cut out of our entire financial, social, economic, communication networks will be able to start building something, and then hopefully provide alternatives to this one-way road to success, whether that's through school, through the right job, through all these other old kind of forms of reputation.
And
Last question.
I will argue that what you're describing as being broken is actually not the reputation system, rather than the centralization of those entities. So as we have like centralized university or like high schools, people are fighting to actually get into this model, whereas with the blockchain you can actually design decentralized system of like certification of peer-to-peer university and things like this, in which you can acquire reputation because you actually can do something, because you can prove that you can do something, and your peers are evaluating you and are endorsing the fact that you have these particular skills. So you can actually use the reputation system to design decentralized system which are just as valuable.
So the ID persona reputation system that we're building has user configurable privacy. It's based on a hierarchical deterministic address tree, so a tree of addresses, and you can have different personas that have different subtrees, and I can choose to interact from this address, which is not publicly disclosed as part of this persona, and I can keep track that was part of that persona, but nobody in the world knows that, or I can choose to interact from a smart contract that's related to this persona, and that interaction is public. So I can choose what I want to disclose.
Okay, a question over here.
Yeah, I just have a thinking about this decentralized collaborative organization. I think all these models are based quite strongly on the rational choice models and of human interaction, and so that's a bit of a problem, I think, and maybe we need to add more anthropological or sociological knowledge on human interaction and exchange, that there is also some exchange happening beyond tokens and reputation and all these things. So if I'm listening to you, I mean, I'm a sociologist, so if I listen to this, I'm kind of getting a bit scared. And it may only be words, but I think it's also the mental models that are behind this. And I think that's something, the moderator, you mentioned this quite clearly.
Yes.
So I think we need to think a bit deeper about, as somebody said on the panel, every interaction can be economical, and that's certainly not true. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
So actually, COALA is we've organized these series of workshops precisely because we need to have more than lawyers and economists and financial regulators discussing these issues. This is much, much deeper. And so we would love to have you join our working groups and contribute and hopefully, help guide us in the right direction as we build out and architect these systems. I think that's an incredibly important area that we need to consider.
Yeah, just to add, I'm also a sociologist. That's my degrees I got, and I completely agree. I mean, not all interactions are supposed to be intermediated through a blockchain. It could be, and if people want to do that, then it's their prerogative. But it's definitely the case that we can decide, and we as long as we provide a spectrum for people to choose, hopefully that helps.
And I think you can just see it as like as with the internet. I mean, I guess maybe 10 years ago, people were like afraid that the internet would eliminate social interactions. In fact, the internet actually enabled social interactions. So the blockchain is the same thing. Like, obviously, we don't just want to become like economic tokens and whatnot. However, we can mediate our social interaction through the blockchain, and this can actually be quite powerful.
Yeah, so very good point. I agree. What we're doing is trying to put together a foundation upon which many different perspectives on how we interact with one another can be layered. We will do lots of experimenting. Some of these experiments will work, some will be rejected. We will iteratively build better and better systems, hopefully on a better foundation.
Last question over here.
Yeah, I have 1,000 questions, just one.
We do have coffee break coming up.
Right. Throughout the course of the conference, there have been a number of key words mentioned many times, and some of them are synonymous with one another, but one word that keeps hitting me is this word trust. And I hear, it seems like I hear, both sides of this, two parts of this. Trust is a very important part of what goes on with these cryptocurrencies and things, but on the other hand, trust is removed, or it's taken care of in an entirely different way or something. Help me understand that a little bit better.
It's a very good question. I've found that the terminology we use here can sometimes be confusing. The way you can describe it is when you walked into this conference room and you sat on the chair, like, did you have to go through the process of thinking that this chair will hold your weight? I mean, it's something that just you don't think about. I mean, you don't think about can I trust this chair? It's like, and that's part of the reason of thinking behind these kind of systems, is that when you interact with a centralized institution, you have to imbue that relationship with some kind of belief that this will be okay. And when you try and move to trustless systems or low trust systems, it means that you don't require that interaction to be there. If that helps.
It's confusing because it's actually, by saying trustless, it means you're trusting without going through this complicated process of establishing the trust. So it's actually the opposite.
One other way to describe it is we do certain things when we interact with people that implicitly show we can trust them. So, I mean, I'm not entirely sure if this is historically true, but one of the reasons why they claim why we shake hands is to show that I'm not carrying a weapon, right? So that's implicitly just something that happens that we take for granted to show that you're fine, right? So that's an example.
Right, so there are no trust-free systems. The Bitcoin protocol, the Ethereum protocol are trust-minimized systems. And in Bitcoin and Ethereum, we can all feel comfortable that if we see the data on the blockchain, we can know that everybody agrees that that data is there. On the Ethereum system, if we see a computation done on the blockchain, we can all know that everybody agrees that that computation, that state transition in a computer program, is perceived as the same state transition by everybody. So that's a good foundation for trust-minimized systems.
And I will also add that we need to definitely distinguish between like the trustlessness of the underlying technology, which is basically we trust the technology and we don't need to trust an entity operating the technology. But then whenever we deploy application on top of that, like, I mean, if you deploy a decentralized Uber on top of the blockchain, there is still trust. The trust is, I need to trust that the person that I'm driving with is a good driver or is not a bad person. So even though the technology is trustless and you don't need to trust a central operator on top of it, it doesn't mean that as we use the blockchain in order to interact with each other, then the trust, on the contrary, we actually need to, and that's why we need to build those decentralized governance model in order to actually understand how we can trust each other on top of a trustless platform.
All right, and with that, I'd like to thank our panelists for this fascinating discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.